Yeah, so Anatoly kindly invited me to take part in a special issue that was published this year on infodemics and for the journal where he's an editor, the Big Data and Society journal. So um, I realized that the study that we published for this special issue was maybe not the most sort of not the type of research that traditionally gets published in this journal. It was sort of slightly different in terms of scope and methodology, which I hope could be of interest, especially because also I think this not necessarily mixing and matching, but sort of this blurring of boundaries between different types of methodologies um, is happening more and more, and I think that's an extremely useful and extremely important thing to be happening, especially when we're looking at really complicated questions like COVID-19 misinformation, for example. um, Having knowledge of and knowing how to use different types of methodologies depending on the type of question that you're answering um, is a very useful thing and a useful skill as a researcher to have. So um, when we were designing this study, we were faced with a bit of a problem. And to sort of illustrate the scope of this problem, I went to Wikipedia, and Wikipedia has a page that's called "List of Unproven Methods Against COVID-19," and it's pretty hilarious. I would recommend looking it up. Or at least it would be hilarious if it wasn't actually fairly serious in the sense that people actually believe some of this stuff, including this. This is a scam. So USB flash drives are being sold for as much as $370 as a 5G BioShield. This is basically just a flash drive you buy for $2 in a shop somewhere, and you sell it as protecting you against COVID-19, 5G mobile phone radio waves. Another thing is exposing people to sunlight will not prevent or cure COVID-19. This is a very, very widespread conspiracy theory, or conspiracy, but misinformation. Because at least at the beginning of the pandemic, people assumed that you couldn't get sick if you were from a warm country, which of course isn't the case. And the consequences of that misinformation are pretty serious. So these are just some random news articles that I found, right? Here at the top, you see 700 people who are dead after drinking alcohol. That was laced with some stuff that you probably shouldn't be drinking. Um, in the United Kingdom, we had a lot of instances of vandalism where people would set mobile phone masts on fire. And here, top right, I think most of you will be familiar with what can only really be described as a pretty disastrous handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. A lot of countries handled it badly, especially initially, but Brazil has been especially bad in terms of case rates, number of people that have died, and so on. So there's obviously that, right, that misinformation about this virus has serious and real consequences in the real world. And this, I think, is a really interesting example of that. Now that we've sort of shifted from talking about how serious the virus is and what you can do about it to cure it, we're talking more and more about vaccines and how well they work, and also that means that a lot of the misinformation about COVID is surrounding the production and or implementation of the vaccines. And the reason this says in the winner is this was the most viral Facebook story of 2021, at least so far. Meaning, out of every single thing that went viral, this went the most viral on Facebook. And that's pretty bad, right? Because here we have a serious problem. We have a series of serious problems. Number one is the Chicago Tribune is a pretty good newspaper, right? It's not known as a source of fake news most often. And the second problem we have is every single word in this headline is correct, right? So this did happen. A healthy doctor did die 2 weeks after he got vaccinated against COVID, and the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, was indeed investigating why at the time. Problem is, even though this is factually correct, it's tremendously problematic because of the implication that the doctor died because he was vaccinated, which isn't the case. And even if it was the case, implying that someone dies after taking a vaccine without any kind of allusion to the likelihood of such an event in a headline, you could also arguably say is misleading, right? So obviously, a lot of people who just read this headline took it the wrong way and thought, oh, well, if a healthy doctor, a medical professional, can die from getting the COVID vaccine, maybe it's not as safe as they say. Turns out that in reality, they looked at this and they found that you could neither confirm nor deny that this doctor was died because of the vaccine. It wasn't clear at all. So now when you visit this page, it has a correction sort of in the first line that says, well, we don't really know how this happened, right? But obviously the damage has already been done. So we have a bit of a problem, and that probably means we should be doing something. So that was kind of the impetus for this study, and as I'll talk about a bit later, so the framework that we applied to find a solution for this particular problem is not to look at things like algorithms or legislation or making technological changes to social media platforms, etc. Because I work at the psychology department, we tend to look for psychological solutions, and we figured, well, why not get a little bit creative? And we were inspired by this quote by Professor Snape, right? If you are faced with the dark arts, it's advisable to also be flexible and inventive as the dark arts that you seek to undo. And that framework within psychology, sort of defense against dark arts, if you will, the most common framework for that kind of stuff is called inoculation theory. And for those of you who don't know, for those of you who do, forgive me if I repeat myself, but the idea of a psychological inoculation against, in this case, misinformation, is to prevent people from being persuaded by something that you don't want them to be persuaded by, right? So it's not a persuasion tool in and of itself. Rather, the goal is to raise or up people's cognitive defenses against persuasive attacks. And how does that work? It works much like, metaphorically, it works much like a real vaccine. So a medical vaccine in many cases, right? The mRNA vaccines are a bit different, but traditional vaccines are weakened versions of a particular virus or pathogen that when you introduce it into the body thinks it's sick, right? Because it's faced with, let's say, viral particles, starts building or producing antibodies to fight off the infection. And then the next time you're actually hit with the real virus, you already have the antibodies in place to resist the infection, and you don't get ill, or you don't get as ill. And here the idea is the same. So what you do is you preemptively, before they are exposed to a persuasive argument or persuasive attack of some kind, you warn them that an attack on their beliefs is coming. So, hey, watch out, someone might be trying to manipulate you. And secondly, you preemptively refute the argument or technique, depending. Meaning you don't only warn people, you also tell them, actually, someone might be trying to persuade you of X, but X is incorrect because of Y and Z, right? And what that does, in principle, or at least in theory, is it triggers the production of what you could metaphorically call, and not chemically, mental antibodies. Meaning you're internally rehearsing the arguments that that are trying to persuade you, and your arguments against them. And what that does is it reduces the chance that you will be persuaded by this argument in the future. That's sort of the theoretical framework behind it. And traditionally, inoculation research was invented basically in the 1960s during the Vietnam War, as a matter of fact, when psychologists at Yale were asked to invent what they call the vaccine against brainwash, because the American Department of Defense wanted to prevent their soldiers, prisoners of war, let's say in Vietnam, from being brainwashed by the enemy. Interesting sort of tidbit in terms of background. But traditionally, this inoculation theory has been applied on specific issues. And what do I mean by that? I'll explain at the hand of a particular example that was published by my colleague Sandra van der Linden a couple years ago, 2017. And what they tried to do was they tried to inoculate people against misinformation about climate change, so specific inoculation. So what they did was they recruited a bunch of study participants, and these study participants were shown an image, a screenshot, basically, that contained either a message about the scientific consensus that comes when it comes to climate change. So 97% of climate scientists have concluded that human-caused climate change is happening, which is basically true, and a misinformation message. So a fake petition about climate change being a hoax, right? So this is a viral news story that was completely fake, went viral a couple of years ago, 2016, I believe, where it said this petition was signed by 30,000 scientists, and they all say that climate change is not happening, right? What didn't really happen, like most of those people weren't, like 99.9% of people who signed it were not actively publishing climate scientists, right? So if you have a PhD in history and you sign that document, you have a lot of knowledge, but not necessarily about whether climate change is happening, right? So there's that. So either people were shown that message, or they were shown both messages alongside each other, right? So the consensus message or the misinformation message. And then there were two more groups of people. Well, three more, one control group, but two more groups of interest. And in one of these groups, participants were shown a general inoculation message. So watch out, people might be trying to manipulate you. Don't be persuaded. And another group was shown the full vaccine or a specific inoculation message. Yes? And they were shown this before they were shown the misinformation about the fake petition, right? And what does that look like in terms of results? Well, if you here on the y-axis, you have people's shift in perception towards plus or minus away from the scientific consensus about climate change. So before and after this experiment, people were asked, to what extent do you think scientists agree on the reality of climate change, right? And if you show them only the simple fact, that does quite a lot. It shifts their perception by about 20%. If you show them the misinformation, right, the petition, it shifts away from the scientific consensus. And if you show both side by side, there's absolutely no shift, meaning the benefits of showing people simple facts about climate change is sort of nullified by the fact that you show them misinformation. And then here you have the inoculation groups, and this is the partial vaccine. So there's it's a partial recovery of the simple facts effect. And here with the full vaccine, you still see that, but then you see that it's still slightly larger, right? So that was proof, basically, or at least initial proof, that people could be, like, people's attitudes could be protected against persuasive attacks by means of the inoculation. That's great, right? But there's a bit of a problem here, namely issue-based inoculation is not very scalable because you can't feasibly inoculate people against any individual instance of misinformation. It just doesn't work. There's too much out there. So the solution to that, and that's the framework that we applied in our study, what if instead you focus on the techniques that people use in misinformation, right? So, for example, what if you inoculate people against the use of emotionally manipulative language, right? Like, I'm trying to get you to feel angry or afraid about something, as opposed to trying to inform you. Polarizing language, I'm focusing on like how horrible certain groups are, as opposed to, again, trying to inform you. Conspiratorial reasoning, like, can you teach people the components of a conspiracy theory, basically? And does that then reduce susceptibility to conspiratorial reasoning, because people now know actually this is a conspiracy? Interesting. Logical fallacies are another example, right? So as Anatoly mentioned a while ago at the beginning of the talk, the initial sort of thing that we did as far as like the method of technique-based inoculation goes, we created a game called Bad News, getbadnews.com, which is basically in the game you are you run a fake news website, and you have to get as many followers as you can, as it says on the screen. And in so doing, you learn how different types of manipulation techniques work. And the second game here on the right is Harmony Squared, harmonysquared.game, which is about basically about misinformation and polarization. So how do you leverage the power of information to drive groups in society apart and get people to absolutely hate each other? And the setup of the game is you're hired as the chief disinformation officer for a particular shady company organization, and your goal is to mount an information campaign to reduce the peaceful community of Harmony Square to rubble. So here, this is the beginning state of the square, right? You have a beautiful, clean pineapple statue, a happy swan, and this is a living statue, and it sort of, well, it doesn't really end too well. And the goal of that is also to show how sort of you can achieve these kinds of things using information campaigns. In terms of the efficacy of that, there's a lot. We have a few studies out, quite a few actually, about the effectiveness of these types of games as far as inoculation interventions go. I'll just discuss this one. So the long-term effectiveness, what you see here on the y-axis is the perceived reliability or the reliability rating of a series of fake news posts, social media posts that we showed people, right? And what you want is for the inoculation condition here to perceive fake news to be significantly less reliable after they played the game. And that's what you see here. T1 is before they played. So here you see no difference between treatment and control. T2 is just after they played. And there you see that there's a significant reduction for the inoculation group, but not for the control group. T3 is 1 week after playing. T4 is 5 weeks. No, wait, I'm wrong. T2 is immediately after. T3 is 5 weeks. T4 is 8 weeks. And T5 is 13 weeks. So here you see that this reduction is sort of fairly consistent. But it's important to note that these testing moments, they basically serve as booster shots almost. So people need kind of regular reminders of the lessons that they learned, otherwise the effect decays. Right, so to get to the study that we actually published for this special issue, that's this one, towards psychological herd immunity, cross-cultural evidence for 2 prebunking interventions against COVID-19 misinformation. The reason it says prebunking and inoculation are used sort of interchangeably. It's not exactly the same, but usually prebunking means preemptive debunking, and one of the ways to do prebunking is using this inoculation framework. Just to give a very brief overview of that. And what did we do? So in collaboration with the UK Cabinet Office, which is, I don't exactly know the Canadian and or American equivalent of that, but it's basically the, I guess, Interior Ministry, something like that. Doesn't really matter. The arm of the government. We created this game called Go Viral. And Go Viral is about, you can go here to this website, goviralgame.com, if you're interested. And the game is pretty simple. This is the front page, and then here you have on the right what it looks like. It's about 5 minutes long. And here at the top you have your likes, and here you have your credibility. And the idea is get all the likes, but if your credibility drops all the way to 0, you're dead, and it's game over. And here you can see how it works. So here you have a social media post, and you can see here your response options. You play through the game, and basically what you do is you become the overlord of an online echo chamber that talks about COVID-19, and what you try to do is sow chaos in society by sort of manipulating the flow of information around COVID-19. And that follows 3 particular scenarios. The first one is the emotional language scenario. The second one is the fake expert scenario. And the third one is the conspiracy scenario. So each of these scenarios represents one particular misinformation technique, and more on that later. In this study, this one, or in this publication, we had 2 separate studies. So I'll discuss study 1 first. And study 1 was actually pretty simple. Within the game, so that we designed, we implemented a survey. And this was a pre-post survey. So at the beginning of the game, people were asked, hey, as you see here on the left, would you mind answering a couple of questions and help us with our scientific research? And then if people say sure, they provide anonymous sort of consent. And we, the nice thing about it is that we never collect any kind of data in terms of IP addresses. It's all just anonymized. And what that looks like is, here is the survey question. So you see a social media post, right, that we found somewhere on a fact-checking website. We stripped it of all sort of identifying source information, so the usernames are way gone. There's no profile picture, etc. But you do see here, no laureate professor or something claims that the virus is not natural and that there is evidence to suggest that it's man-made. And the key thing to pick up on here is that this is a fake expert, right? So you're borrowing the credibility, let's say, of perceived experts on a certain topic, right? You're saying, well, this is a Nobel laureate, and therefore what they're saying must be reliable, right? And what you're hoping to see is, you ask people, how manipulative do you find this post? And what you hope to see is that after playing, compared to before, they will see this post as significantly more manipulative than before. And here are the results from the study. So here on the left, you have on the y-axis the perceived manipulativeness of fake news or misinformation about COVID-19. So here you can see pre and post. So pre is before playing, post is after playing. And this here, fake news, that's the average for all the items that we had. So in total, we had 3 fake news items and 3 real news items. And what you see here is the perceived manipulativeness goes up significantly here, like this arrow points up, right? So that means here is the fake expert post that you saw, and then this is the before score and the after score, and it goes up by a lot. Here's the emotion score before, after goes up by a lot, and the conspiracy score before and after goes up by a lot. Or, well, not as much, but at least the difference is statistically significant. Whereas here on the right, you have real news. So what you want to see, of course, is people, if they play the game and the game actually has a learning effect or inoculation effect, they become better able to spot fake news, but they don't necessarily also see real news that doesn't contain any misinformation as more manipulative, right? Because otherwise you might just be generally increasing people's skepticism as opposed to actually training them to spot misinformation. And here you see that line is pretty flat. So there isn't really a difference between before and after playing in terms of the perceived manipulativeness of real news. Okay, so that was our hypotheses confirmed. Basically, this is what exactly the pattern that we expected. So we were very happy to see that. But of course, there were very, very stringent limitations to this particular study. It was pretty simple within subjects, pre-post. Right? We used that kind of methodology before, but it wasn't necessarily, you can have a lot of criticisms about it, including the following. So you don't have a control group, right? Okay, how can you say something about like the actual effect of the game if you don't have a control group? Fair point. What are the longitudinal effects? What if this effect that you find here, right? What if it's gone in 5 minutes? What if you really achieved? Fair point. You've only tested it in English, right? This survey was only implemented in the English language version of the Go Viral game. But what if it only works in English and not in any other language? Also a fair point. Another criticism might be, well, actually, so you created this whole game, right? But what if just reading something works just as well, right? Haven't you just wasted all that time and effort? Also a fair point. And as you can see in this graph, here you only have one pair, 2 pairs, 3 pairs, and then 3 pairs again here. So only 6 social media posts that you're using in your survey, which isn't a whole lot. So you might have item effects, right? It might just be an artifact of the items that you used your effects, as opposed to actually seeing a real effect that isn't specific to the items that you created, social media posts. All fair points. So that's why we ran a second study. And in the second study, we included alongside the game these infographics created by UNESCO as a separate intervention. So UNESCO has a campaign called Think Before Sharing. And this campaign basically featured a series of infographics that were designed with the help of researchers that also follow the inoculation methodology. And here you can see some of them. And they basically explain how to spot misinformation, including conspiracy theories about COVID-19. So we use that as a separate intervention that we tested alongside the game. And in this study, which we ran on the online platform Prolific Academic, and RCT means randomized control trial, we had 1,777 participants. And we ran this study in 3 countries, so the UK, Germany, and France. We had 3 conditions that participants were randomly assigned to: the go viral condition, the UNESCO COVID infographics condition that I just showed, and a control group which played Tetris for a similar amount of time that it takes to play go viral, which is a game, right? The reason Tetris works really well for this is because it's in the public domain, so you don't need to pay for using it. Most people have heard of it, and they kind of intuitively understand what you need to do, but it's completely unrelated to misinformation. So it's a pretty useful intervention like that. And we had a couple of research questions. Question number 1, does playing go viral or reading the infographics improve people's ability to spot manipulative social media content about COVID-19? Question number 2, does playing go viral or reading the infographics improve people's confidence and their ability to do so? Do people feel more equipped to spot this kind of content afterwards? Meaning, are they not only better at it, but also do they think they're better at it? And number 3, does playing the game or reading the infographics reduce people's self-reported willingness to share misinformation about COVID-19 with other people, which is sort of an indicator of at least intended behavior, right? So what you hope to see is that after they play or after they read the infographics, they reconsider their decisions to share something or forward to others, perhaps, right? Okay. And the final research question was, does this inoculation effect remain detectable 1 week after people played or after people read the infographics? Right. How did we implement that? So we had, instead of 6, we had 18 items in total. 18, I believe. Could be more. No, 18. 18 is correct. And the items look like this here. Again, stripped of all source information. And here you see, a particular fairly manipulative social media post. And this is the question that people were asked. Question number 1, this post is manipulative, and then you can indicate on a 7-point scale: strongly disagree, strongly agree. I'm confident in my ability to judge this manipulativeness, and I would share this post with people in my network. And what you hope to see is, so we administered this test again before and after the intervention. What you hope to see is that people in the treatment groups, that this one goes up for the misinformation, this one goes up, and this one goes down. That's sort of the hypothesized direction. So we pre-registered that, hoping to find that. And these are the results. So here you see a violin plot with the box plot here in the middle. And what is here on the y-axis is the difference before and after the intervention of the perceived manipulativeness of misinformation about COVID. And what you hope to see is that this difference goes up, right? Because you want the difference to be higher, like you want the score to be higher after than before. And what you see here, I mean, I know that it's not the clearest figure, but it's, trust me, it's there. What you see is that there's a significant difference between the go viral condition and the control condition, and between, so that means that the go viral game worked as hypothesized, but this is also significant between the infographics condition and the control condition. Meaning that the infographics condition, people who read the infographics, that it also worked for them. It's just that the effect size, as you can see here, is substantially smaller than for the infographics condition. Meaning there's a huge sort of difference between these two in terms of the size and strength of the effect. Secondly, this is important. So this is basically the same graph as the one that I showed before, just slightly different format about the longitudinal effects. Here again on the y-axis, you have the perceived manipulativeness of fake news and real news. And here you have T1, T2, and T3. T1 is before playing. T2 is just after playing or reading. and T3 is 1 week after. And what's important is here you see this effect, right? So for the go viral condition, it goes up by a lot from 5.47 to 5.98. Whereas here in the control group, it barely goes up. And in the infographics group, it goes up, but by a lot less. And after that, it's important here to compare the red bars to each other. So that's the T3, so 1 week after playing. And in this 1 week after playing, so that 1 week after they participated in the survey, we showed participants a new series of social media posts that they had never seen before, basically to see, okay, are they still better at recognizing misinformation that they've never come across in any way. And here you see that there's a significant difference between the go viral condition and the control condition. So this effect is still visible 1 week after playing, whereas for the infographics condition, this 5.73 is no longer statistically significant from the control group. So that means that for the go viral condition, the effects remain for 1 week, whereas for the infographics condition, they are basically gone. On the right, you see what happens with real news. And that's a really interesting phenomenon, I think. What you see here in the go viral condition is that immediately after playing, people find real news about COVID-19 significantly more manipulative. So that's a really weird effect that does indicate some level of heightened skepticism, let's say. But 1 week after, that heightened skepticism is completely gone, right? And it's no longer different from the control group. So it's an interesting finding. We don't exactly know how to explain it, but it might be that because of the game, people's skepticism sort of initially heightened, but it does lead to an increased sort of skill at spotting misinformation sort of slightly later on, sort of not immediately, but sort of a few days after. But if you have any better ideas, then I'm very interested in hearing them. Great. That's all. Problem solved? Question mark. I don't think so. Not really. I think it contributes. I think that there's a lot of value in psychological resilience against misinformation, for sure. I think there are some good justifications for doing it this way, but there is also a lot of open questions in terms of, okay, is it feasible as an actual solution, or is this just one out of many? And what are the consequences for example, actual behavior? So if people play a game like this, do they then actually share less misinformation with others, for example? I have my doubts, but we have experiments ongoing to sort of test if that's the case. So that's it. Thank you very much for listening. I hope it didn't go on for too long, and I'm really looking forward to your questions. Thank you so much.